June 12, 2025. Baltic Sea, 0500 a.m. The sky shuddered as over 230 NATO warplanes tore through the dawn, while 40 warships cut the waves and 20,000 soldiers unleashed fire across the coast. F-35s vanished into the clouds, HIMARS lit the horizon, and Patriots locked on unseen threats. In Kaliningrad, Russian screens flared red, sirens, jammers, drones clawing upward. One mistake, one twitch, and Europe would ignite. Because this wasn't training, it was a warning, and the real target was far darker than anyone dared admit. What no one realized that morning was that Moscow was already preparing its answer. The Baltic region simmered with tension. For months, Russian forces in Kaliningrad had quietly expanded, brigades, armored units, and missile launchers moving within striking distance of NATO borders. Cyber attacks rattled European infrastructure, while Moscow's bombers skirted international airspace, sending veiled nuclear threats in state media. Every movement was tracked in Brussels, Berlin, and Washington. Tensions weren't new. NATO had staged large-scale drills before, each time triggering sharp Russian reactions. In 2018, a Russian snap exercise nearly ended in disaster when Su-35s closed within seconds of NATO patrol jets, armed, radar-locked, one wrong move from catastrophe. The footage is still studied today, a reminder of how thin the line truly is. This time, NATO wasn't content with reassurance. The official line spoke of defense and deterrence, but the hidden message was clear: speed, coordination, and global reach. For Moscow, it was a warning. For Beijing, a quiet signal. And for the world, a glimpse of just how quickly a drill could turn into war. But NATO's show of force was only beginning, and what followed just hours later brought both sides within seconds of war. June 12, 2025, 0500 a.m. The Baltic dawn was barely breaking when the roar began. Engines screamed through the cool morning air as F-16s from Poland, F-35s from U.S. carriers, and Eurofighters from Germany surged into the sky in tight formation. Overhead, KC-135 tankers glided steadily, refueling jets mid-flight with a low mechanical hum that mixed with the thunder of jet engines. Below, the ground shook as Leopard 2 tanks rumbled from forested positions, turrets swinging, firing blank rounds that cracked across training fields. HIMARS rocket systems thundered in synchronized salvos, the concussive blasts echoing across villages and rattling windows. From the Baltic waters, 40 NATO warships sliced through gray waves, coordinating as battle groups while simulated Tomahawk cruise missiles arced toward Polish training ranges, leaving plumes of smoke and echoing detonations behind. The response was immediate. Russian radar stations in Kaliningrad lit up, tracking every aircraft, every missile, every flash of movement. S-400 missile batteries locked onto the signatures of incoming jets, scanning relentlessly, though no shots were fired. Within minutes, Moscow scrambled Su-35 flanker E-fighters to shadow NATO formations. Near Lithuania, the Russian jets closed to within 2 miles of NATO aircraft, dangerously close for a peacetime exercise. Ground communications jammed briefly as electronic warfare systems pulsed, creating confusion in NATO command rooms. Controllers' voices cut through the static. Hold formation, do not engage. Tension escalated. A US F-35 reported a radar lock. A Russian pilot had painted it with fire control radar for 6 tense seconds before breaking away. NATO pilots tightened formation, aware that one miscalculation could spark a live confrontation. For the first time since the Cold War, American and Russian jets flew within seconds of collision, an intentional, high-stakes show of force. For 6 seconds, war hung in the balance, and then something even more alarming appeared on NATO's screens. Back in Ramstein Air Base, Germany, generals and analysts hunched over massive screen fed by AWACS planes. Hundreds of red and blue blips converged, a digital storm of aircraft and targets. A colonel muttered under his breath, "One wrong move and this drill turns into World War III." Washington and Brussels exchanged urgent calls, reiterating the need for restraint. Then a new threat appeared. Radar operators spotted Orlan-10 Russian reconnaissance drones circling at 15,000 feet over NATO's exercise zone. The drones transmitted real-time footage back to Kaliningrad, capturing every maneuver. Pilots radioed frantic chatter as UAVs crossed NATO airspace. The debate in control rooms was immediate. Do we shoot them down or let them watch? As NATO troops advanced deeper into the simulated assault, more Russian drones appeared overhead. One Orlan-10 dove dangerously close to a U.S. Patriot missile battery. Operators froze, fingers hovering over launch keys, hearts pounding. Every second stretched, the tension thick as smoke from simulated artillery mingled with the early morning fog. The drill intended to test readiness had evolved into a shadow confrontation. Russian eyes in the sky watched every move, and NATO had no certainty of Moscow's next step. The drill was supposed to test readiness. Instead, it turned into a shadow confrontation with Russian eyes in the sky. What NATO didn't expect was how Moscow would answer. The drill was no longer just training. It was a live confrontation, and the next phase would push both sides even closer to the edge. June 12, 2025, 7 a.m. The Baltic dawn thickened into a gray, heavy sky. Across hundreds of miles, NATO's massive exercise entered its most intense phase, a full-scale simulation of modern warfare. Switching perspectives, command and control. At Ramstein Air Base, Germany, giant screens glowed with red and blue blips, hundreds of dots moving like swarms across digital maps. Generals leaned over consoles, whispering as Russian aircraft entered shadow zones, skimming NATO airspace with precise, deliberate maneuvers. Orders cascaded down the chain: maintain formation, escalate training phase. Analysts noted every radar ping, every jet altitude, every slight deviation in flight paths. It was an intricate choreography of air, sea, and land. Thousands of kilometers away, USS Gerald R cut through choppy Baltic waters. On deck, crews scrambled as FA-18 Super Hornets and F-35Cs lined up, wings locked, engines glowing. Steam catapults roared, throwing jets into the gray sky with explosive force. Below deck, the Carrier Intelligence Center monitored sonar pings, detecting Russian submarines gliding silently beneath the waves. The tension was palpable. Every aircraft launched was a message of readiness, every ping a reminder that Moscow was watching. Meanwhile, in Kaliningrad, Russian anti-air units prepared their counters. S-400 and Panzer batteries scanned the skies, tracking incoming NATO formations. Crews debated whether to lock missiles on targets, fingers hovering near triggers. Mobile Iskander missile units repositioned inland, a quiet but unmistakable signal. Any provocation would be noticed. Across all three locations, tension pulsed like a heartbeat. The exercise was now a high-stakes game of observation and reaction. Wave 1. Drones. The first strike relied on MQ-9 Reaper drones and smaller European UAVs. They lifted into the sky silently, gliding over training zones, cameras and sensors feeding live data back to NATO command. Then, Russian jammers pulsed, briefly cutting video feeds. Operators leaned over control stations, reconnecting UAVs to their flight paths. The drones pushed toward their simulated targets, mapping out radar stations, striking with digital precision. On command screens, explosions of data flashed, representing hits on mock installations, each operator aware that Moscow was watching every move. The bridge between drones and artillery was seamless. Data from UAVs immediately informed the next wave. Live-fire artillery. M777 howitzers in Poland thundered, sending 155mm rounds across training fields. HIMARS rocket systems fired guided salvos at mock bunkers, the ground vibrating beneath the impact. Dust clouds rose, stretching across forests and fields, and even villagers in nearby towns felt the reverberations. Overhead, Russian intelligence satellites captured each blast in real time, transmitting images directly to Moscow, proof that NATO's precision and coordination were as formidable as the noise suggested. Wave 3. Ground assault. Tanks rumbled forward. Leopard 2s advanced through muddy fields, their turrets swinging in synchronized arcs. U.S. Bradley YFVs followed in tight formation, infantry poised to storm mock villages. Above, Apache gunships and Blackhawks provided simulated close air support, rotors slicing the gray air. Infantry units moved through urban mock-ups, clearing buildings and setting up checkpoints, a precise dance between machine and soldier. Shockwaves from artillery rounds rattled windows in nearby villages. Civilians filmed the scene, posting footage online, creating viral clips that made the exercise visible far beyond the borders of Poland and Germany. The bridge between land and air became stark during the counter-invasion simulation. NATO announced the final drill phase, defending Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania against a Red Force modeled on Russian tactics. Troops crossed rivers, secured bridges, and repelled armored pushes, working in tandem with jets overhead and artillery fire on the ground. Russian media decried the exercise as a dress rehearsal for war. In Kaliningrad, jets scrambled once more, buzzing close to NATO formations, engines screaming over forests and lakes. The exercise was no longer just a test of readiness. It was a vivid display of capability and coordination, visible to both allies and adversaries. The Russian Navy deployed Starogushchi-class corvettes into the Baltic, maneuvering to monitor NATO warships. Submarines moved quietly beneath, sonar pings echoing the invisible tension under the waves. On state-controlled television, Moscow broadcast footage of Iskander missile convoys, nuclear-capable, rolling through forests and back roads. Russian generals issued stern warnings. We will not allow NATO rehearsal on our doorstep. Every action, every countermeasure, escalated the sense that this was more than a drill. It was a high-stakes demonstration of modern warfare, both visible and clandestine. Behind the headlines and media attention, NATO planners were running a deeper scenario. Intelligence revealed the exercise was testing rapid reinforcement logistics, shifting troops from Europe to Asia in under 48 hours. Supply chains, airlift capacity, carrier operations, and command networks were stress-tested simultaneously. The drones, artillery, and tanks were not only simulating combat, they were rehearsing a war that could extend far beyond the European theater. As the day's drills wound down, more Russian reconnaissance drones circled above, recording every maneuver. One drone dived close to a U.S. Patriot missile battery, forcing operators' fingers to hover over launch keys. In Ramstein and aboard carriers, analysts shared grim glances. The line between a training exercise and real-world conflict had never felt thinner. NATO called it a drill. Russia called it provocation. But behind the thunder of artillery, NATO's real mission was only just being revealed. June 12, 2025, 1830. As the Baltic sun dipped behind gray clouds, NATO's massive exercise officially wound down. Tanks rolled back across muddy fields, jets landed on aircraft carriers and air bases, and troops stacked vehicles for redeployment. On the surface, it looked like the end of a drill, a show of defensive readiness against Russia. But beneath the announcements, a different story unfolded, revealing the hidden reason. Leaked briefings revealed the true test: the rapid deployment of U.S. divisions from the continental United States to Europe within 72 hours. NATO was stress-testing the entire supply chain: railways in Poland, ports in Germany, highways snaking into the Baltics. Over the course of the day, 20,000 troops, 1,200 vehicles, and 230 aircraft had moved across borders at wartime speed. Every bridge crossed, every convoy coordinated, every aircraft launched wasn't just about Europe. Pentagon strategists quietly emphasized that these logistics could be redirected to Asia if a Pacific conflict erupted. The message was simple: we can fight and win on two fronts, Europe and Asia. Publicly, Washington framed the drill as defensive, designed to reassure Baltic allies. But intelligence analysts knew the drill had multiple audiences. Moscow had eyes on the exercise, but Beijing watched closely as well. If NATO could rapidly reinforce Europe, U.S. forces could pivot to Asia while maintaining strategic depth in Europe. Russian officials denounced the drill as provocation, while Chinese media dismissed it as psychological warfare. Behind closed doors, analysts debated whether the drill had succeeded in sending a subtle warning to both powers. Among NATO officers, the sense of accomplishment was tangible. A U.S. colonel on the ground said, "Every bridge we crossed, every convoy we moved was about proving we can do this under fire. Speed and coordination matter more than firepower here." Far from headquarters, civilians experienced the exercise differently. A Latvian farmer filmed jets screaming overhead, livestock scattering in panic. "It feels like war is already here," he said, shaking his head. In Estonia, an elderly woman remembered Soviet tanks rolling through decades ago. "I saw this once before. Back then, they did not call it a drill." NATO's reports were precise: 20,000 troops redeployed, 400 tanks and IFVs transported, dozens of live-fire missions completed. Response times had improved by 30% compared to last year's exercises. But Russia was not idle. 10,000 troops mobilized in Kaliningrad, Iskander missile units rolled near the border, and state TV broadcast stern warnings. This is how wars begin. The signals were unmistakable. Both sides measured capability and intent. As soldiers returned to bases and skies cleared over the Baltic, intelligence officers analyzed every movement. NATO had achieved a milestone in global logistics, a test far broader than any defensive drill. What was meant to look like a rehearsal for a European contingency was, in fact, a trial run for worldwide war readiness. The tanks rolled back, the skies cleared, and the soldiers returned to base. But the lesson lingered. NATO's true target was never just Moscow. The world had just witnessed a message aimed thousands of miles east. And if Russia saw this as provocation, what happened the next morning proved just how dangerous that perception could become. June 13th, 2025, 7 a.m. The Baltic skies were quiet. but the echoes of yesterday's NATO drill still rippled through Europe. In Moscow, Kremlin officials watched the reports, denouncing the exercise as direct preparation for aggression. Within hours, Iskander-M missiles were redeployed to Kaliningrad, nuclear-capable and with a range of 500 kilometers, now casting a shadow over Berlin and Warsaw. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry staged snap Arctic drills. Two 95 bombers flew long-range patrols near Norway, and the Northern Fleet conducted anti-submarine exercises under the polar ice, signaling Moscow's to open a second front if needed. Regional fallout was immediate. Sweden and Finland, newly welcomed into NATO, scrambled Gripen and F-18 jets for Baltic air patrols. Finnish border units were reinforced, commanders citing unprecedented Russian readiness. In the Baltics, governments requested permanent U.S. troop rotations. Battalion-sized contingents were slated for Latvia and Lithuania, while Poland pushed for more Patriot batteries and accelerated delivery of M1A2 Abrams tanks. Civilians watched armored convoys and fighter jets overhead, the fear palpable. Allied messaging projected confidence. NATO Secretary General hailed the drill as a resounding success. Washington emphasized transatlantic unity, framing the exercise as proof of readiness against any adversary. Yet behind closed doors, military planners debated costs, fuel shortages, logistical strain, and the political toll of soldiers and tanks rolling through towns. Every success carried a weight of responsibility. The global chessboard shifted. Beijing criticized NATO's actions as destabilizing theatrics. Analysts noted the growing military cooperation between Russia and China, joint bomber patrols over the Sea of Japan, intelligence sharing, and coordinated weapons development. Chinese media framed NATO's drill as U.S. practice for encirclement, strengthening domestic narratives about Western hostility. Moscow and Beijing's partnership appeared deeper, signaling the first cracks in a unipolar post-Cold War order. Psychological impact stretched across borders. In Kaliningrad, residents posted shaky videos of missile convoys rolling through city streets. In Latvia, an elderly farmer whispered, "It feels like the front line runs through my backyard again." Western publics were divided. Some drew reassurance from NATO's readiness, while others worried that provocation was only inching the world closer to conflict. NATO insisted this was just training, a rehearsal for defense. But in Moscow's eyes, the line between exercise and war was vanishing. With Russia and China drawing closer, every drill, every convoy, every missile parade carried a double meaning. And the question hung over Europe and Asia alike: how many more drills can the world endure before one of them goes too far? What started as a drill to reassure allies ended up sending a stark warning to Moscow and a quiet signal to Beijing. Tanks rolled back, jets touched down, and soldiers returned to base. But the lessons lingered. NATO had tested not just defense, but the ability to move troops and firepower anywhere, on any front. Across Kaliningrad and the Baltics, civilians recorded the roar of jets, the tremor of armored vehicles, the sense that the front line could be closer than anyone imagined. Globally, strategists watched, measured, and calculated. Every movement, every convoy, every launch carried meaning. In a world this tense, even practice runs can set the stage for real war. If you want to see what happens when the next exercise goes wrong, subscribe and follow us as events unfold.